This is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Amen. In the name of the newborn King, the one worshipped today with the wise men, dear brothers and sisters, I remember the phrase well. It was said often at my house. I remember the phrase was often said on summer days, maybe a day when I was home from college or the seminary. Maybe mid-morning had come. I remember it was probably said during school vacations too. And it was probably said maybe some Sunday mornings when I was growing up, when we had to leave for church in about a half hour. I remember both my mom and my dad would say it. And they would say it with a knock on the door. They would say, "Rise and shine." They would always say it cheerfully. Never said in spite, but I heard it often at my house. You know, today we're going to hear Isaiah say that. Arise and shine. And those words are going to imply two things. First of all, it's going to imply, come to, get going, get awake, wake up, get up. And then also, get excited, feel the joy, exude the joy to others. Rise and shine. On this Epiphany Day, we're going to see how God's people needed to hear that back then at that time, and how we do as well. And we're going to see three brief reasons in this reading from Isaiah chapter 60 with how and why we should rise and shine. The first one was in verse 1, where we read in Isaiah 60, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you. See, darkness covers the earth, and thick darkness is over the peoples. But the Lord rises upon you, and His glory appears over you." Now, as we read those verses, those are written about 700 years before Jesus came. But you have to know something about Isaiah. Isaiah wrote about the Messiah, about Jesus, as if He were there, and He almost was in the past. He had a prophetic vision where He was looking ahead to events that were going to take place and writing about them as if they were as good as done. Sometimes He writes in the past tense. Some people, because He writes so much about Jesus' life and ministry, they call Him the fifth gospel writer. And here He writes like it's already there. Get ready now. Light has come. It's daytime, and daytime is time to get up and get going. Maybe your parents told you that as well. This light that had come is the light that had been promised. It had been promised since the first book of the Bible. It had been spoken of all the way through all those Old Testament books. More information revealed that He was coming. And it was also pictured in a lot of their Old Testament worship practices. The sacrifices, the Day of Atonement, the lampstands in the tabernacle, and so on and so on. All of that pointed ahead to the light who was coming. And we saw in December how that light arrived. You know who saw it in a bright way that first Christmas evening? The shepherds. It said the hills lit up around them, and the glory of the Lord shone round about them, and they were terrified. They weren't ready to rise and shine, I guess, that night. And again, today, we see a star, the children said. There was a star that guided him. Isn't it ironic that there were lights that pointed out who the light of the world was? Now, this is really important because there is darkness. Quite a bit of darkness in the world. In fact, there's two words used here for darkness. And in the original language, the two words which are translated simply in your translation, darkness and thick darkness, have a couple pictures behind them. In the first one, just translated darkness, there's a picture that something's hidden, that something's obscured, and it's something that's good, and it's a shame that we can't see it. And so that word figuratively can mean things like misery, sorrow, depression, even death. That's what hangs in this world. And the second word, translated thick darkness, that comes from a word that means a cloud. So it can mean fog. Can you relate to that in our area? You seen any fog lately? You know, it's hard enough driving at night. And I guess as I get older, sometimes at night driving, sometimes it doesn't seem like it comes so easy. And darkness is hard, but then fog is hard too. Just if you have fog in daylight, if that fog is intense, it can be very, very difficult to see ahead. But then combine the two. Foggy darkness that just hovers over the landscape and you can hardly see a thing. It's dangerous driving. But that's the picture that the Bible has for the earth. Isaiah pictures the world as being in thick darkness. And it's the darkness of sin and its effects. You know, I saw some of that darkness over the Christmas vacation. When my kids were home for Christmas from college, and when they were home for vacation, we took a trip up to San Francisco, and we went to Alcatraz. You been to Alcatraz? They have a walking tour that you can take with a recording that you listen to. And we went and we looked at the 5-foot by 9-foot cells that the men were held in. We heard some kind of testimonials of people who had been incarcerated at Alcatraz in our headsets. We also heard from guards and wardens who had served there, just describing the life. We saw the cafeteria where there were guards all in the windows with rifles as they ate. We saw the walled recreation area, which was a little bit bigger than our sanctuary, for 300 men who came in shifts where they could go twice a week for 2.5 hours. And we saw the hole. The hole was one small bank of cells that had metal doors. And in that bank of cells, the door was shut and you had no light as you were put in there for 3, 5, maybe 7 days. It was kind of depressing. Kind of sunk in on you about the darkness of man's heart. People who knew they could go there and still had misbehaved and committed crimes and were sent there. But you know, I saw even more darkness than that. Do you know what happened at the end of the tour? Was that on our headsets, as we were getting ready to exit the building, there were some clear instructions that came across. You must now turn in your headset. Don't try to take your headset with you. You know, if you try to take your headset with you, it will not work once you get off this property. And there are people who are at the door who are going to be waiting to take your headset. So don't you steal that headset that you had on this tour. And it was said rather clearly, and it was pretty clear, there had been people who had stolen headsets. And I thought, how dark is that a person who walks through solitary confinement, through the cafeteria area, and through the terrible play area that they had, and then at the end of the tour, they are so hard and calloused that they would steal this little headset that they give you. That's a dark heart. But we can relate to it, can't we? Because there is a dark heart that's within you. And there's a dark heart that's within me. And maybe it's not with stealing headsets, but maybe you see it in your homes every single week as things flare up or as sins are committed. We need light. And thank God that He sends that light. Thank God that we will see it in the weeks ahead. You know, the Epiphany season is not just today with the wise men, but the Epiphany season in the church lasts 7 weeks. And in it we see readings about Jesus' life and His ministry and His miracles and His preaching and His interaction with people. And He shows Himself to be the perfect Son of God. He shows Himself to be the Messiah, the one who was sent, as Isaiah talked about. We're going to see that in the weeks ahead. And then in Lent, we're going to see Him as He suffers and dies and takes your sin, and He pays for it in full. And then He's put in prison. Oh no, not the prison of Alcatraz, but He's in the tomb for 3 days for you and for me as He pays for our sin, and then He rises victoriously because His mission was successful as He came on a mission of light. Now there's a second lesson here. Not only should we rise and shine because the lights are on, but also listen to verse 3. Nations will come to your light, and the kings to the brightness of your dawn. Lift up your eyes and look about you. All assemble and come to you. Your sons come from afar. Your daughters are carried on the hip. You will look and be radiant, and your heart will throb and swell with joy. What's happening? The nations are coming. And the word for nations in the Old Testament is the same word as Gentiles. The Gentiles are coming. The Gentiles? Paul wrote in our second reading that was a bit of a mystery sometimes to God's people of the Old Testament. The Gentiles are supposed to come? If you think about that, there was this feeling at times in the Old Testament, since God chose Abraham to be the ancestor of the Messiah, that he was only for the Israelites. He was only for the Jewish peoples. They kind of got that feeling, and not only that, but when the laws of Moses came that they were supposed to follow for worship and for life and for government and every aspect of their life, the nations around them weren't given all those laws to keep at that time. This is for just us, just the people of God. Not only that, but they fought against those nations around them often, those uncircumcised Gentiles who opposed them and fought them. Those are not God's people. The promise is not for them. It's a race thing. But they should have known better. This Messiah was supposed to be for all, even though he came through Abraham. In fact, at the time of Abraham himself in Genesis 12, remember the promise that was given? Through you, all nations on earth will be blessed. Or at the time of the dedicating of the temple, Solomon prayed these words. He prayed in 2 Chronicles 6, "As for the foreigner who does not belong to your people Israel, but has come from a distant land because of your great name and your mighty hand, when they come and pray toward this temple, then hear from heaven. Do whatever the foreigner asks of you, so that all the peoples of the earth may know your name and fear you, as do your own people Israel." Solomon prayed that, who built the temple. Even he knew back at that time, this is bigger and more wide than just for the people of Israel. Isaiah had said that too. This is chapter 60 that we're looking at. Back in chapter 42, he had said, "I will make you to be a covenant for the people and a light for the Gentiles." Or chapter 49, "I will also make you a light for the Gentiles, that my salvation may reach to the ends of the earth." Even kings from the east would be welcome to come and worship. We're seeing that in our Sunday Bible class each week. We're looking at Greece, the places where early churches were started. Thessalonica, Corinth, Athens, where Paul tried to start a church. Philippi. We're looking at some of those ancient sites and looking at the accounts in the Bible. Those were Gentile peoples. There were some synagogues along the way, but those were Gentile peoples that Paul went to as he understood nations were flocking. And here's the point. That makes us happy. That gives us joy that people can flock to the gospel. He's for you, even you. He's even for me. And not only that, whenever someone comes into our contact that we can share the gospel with, boy, what joy that gives us. What joy that will give you when you can share with your neighbor or your friend or your coworker what your faith is about. That's a wonderful, joyful thing. That's the most important thing you're going to do that day. What joy that gives us when we have visitors in worship who can hear the gospel. What joy that gives us when people take our Bible basics class, where they can learn about the basics of the Bible and even think about becoming a communicant member of our congregation if they want. That's a joyful, joyful event. We have that joy just like heaven has joy over every sinner that repents as well. The nations are flocking. There's one more thing that we have to see in these verses. Not only is the light going on, not only are the nations flocking, but in verse 5 it also says, "The wealth on the seas will be brought to you, and the riches of the nations will come. Herds of camels will cover your land, young camels of Midian and Ephah, and all from Sheba will come, bearing gold and incense, and proclaiming the praise of the Lord." The third thing we see as we shake off our sleep, they are bringing their gifts and offerings. And they are bringing them in droves to worship the King. What's coming? Well, first of all, just their praise. They proclaim the praise of the Lord. It's natural. Not only that, but they bring their wealth. And they bring their gifts. We had the Magi's gifts. Those were no small gifts that they brought to the newborn King. Even camels are coming. Do you know the role of the camel in the Old Testament? The camel was an 18-wheeler. That was your truck that you traveled with. Have you traveled up and down 99 lately where there's been a lot of trucks? Maybe a whole line of trucks. Maybe a whole flock of trucks. It's hard to pass. Maybe it's hard to drive. It's getting a little dangerous. And then it goes down to 2 lanes and so many trucks. That's the picture. The flocks of camels, they are covering the land. They're from Ephah and Midian. They're all over the place. They are bringing their gifts to the king. Why would they bring them? Why would the wise men pack in a gift for the King Jesus to come that far? Later after our reading, it said in verse 9, it said, "Your children come from afar with their silver and gold to the honor of the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel." Is it their taxes? Are you thinking about your taxes yet? Now that the year's passed, tax time will be coming. Maybe this is their taxes. Do you pay your taxes voluntarily? Would you pay them if you didn't have to? And do you pay them in your mind with honor and reverence, just to honor the government, just because you love our country? You know how it goes. How much do I have to get? Can I get a little bit of a discount over here, over there? We bring them because we must. They did not bring fees or dues or taxes that day. They brought them out of the worship and honor of the Lord that they knew was their king. And what would they bring them for? Why bring gifts? There would be a use for those gifts, especially the gold that those wise men brought. Last week we had the account of the flight to Egypt. That unexpected trip. Trips are not cheap. Unexpected trips are really not cheap. And so there was a tangible need that they could use that treasure for, Mary and Joseph, as they went to Egypt and fled Herod, who wanted to kill the child. So what about us? Our third lesson here today is that we rise and shine because gifts are brought to the king. Why would we bring gifts to the king as well? Out of duty? Pew rent? Taxes? Fees? We bring them out of a thankful heart for the light of the world, out of our worship and our honor for him, for the one who gave everything for our salvation, for the one who lived for us and who died for us, for the one who rose for us, for the one who prepared a place for us in heaven, for the one who is waiting for us there. And not only that, but also for the one who gives you what you need every single week. This is why we naturally bring our treasures and gifts to the king. So what do we bring? I don't know if there's any 18-wheelers out there today, but what do we bring? We bring our first fruits. We bring a proportion of how God has blessed us. We plan ahead, maybe not even as far as the wise men did, who knows how long they traveled, but we plan a percentage of what we have to give to the king out of love and thanks to him. We plan a generous bit so that this king might be honored. And something else. For what? It would be enough if we brought a gift for Jesus and had no idea where that went, or just because. But do you know the Lord gives us the blessing of seeing tangible results that are met because of our gifts? We bring them so that the gospel can be preached here. We bring them so that ministry can be done. We bring them so that children can be taught, so that ministries at our congregation can happen, so that we can have a property and a place that's our headquarters for doing ministry. Also, we bring them so that a portion of them can go to our wider synod group. That goes for world missions. That goes for starting churches in our home country. That goes toward our synod schools and our seminary that train the next generation of pastors and teachers. And this past year, we even gave them a special drive toward opening a Christian preschool as of August. We can see tangible things, and what a blessing it is that God gives us those things that we give our treasures toward. So today, rise and shine. The time has come. The light has gone on. The nations are flocking, and they need to hear. And we can bring our gifts that honor the King. May we remember these things not only today on Epiphany Sunday, but also throughout 2020, as God helps us to rise and shine. Amen. Please rise.